Hi, my name is Amadeo and I work as a researcher for FairFin. FairFin is a Belgian non-profit that strives for a financial system that's good for the planet and its people. Money that's invested today will determine the world of tomorrow. But what happens if that money is invested in things that harm our future? Each year, billions flow to polluting industries such as fossil fuels and plastics. FairFin digs deep into these numbers of our banks, and we speak out when investments are harmful. In this FairFin Plastic Podcast, I want to talk to you about the research we did with FairFin on the financing of plastic production. Because in order to stop the plastic flood, we need to take a look at the companies that make plastic and the money making it all possible from our banks.
You don't have any sustainable material, you have only sustainable systems. So, useful in the system we have today, yes. But is this system what we need? No.
This first episode of the podcast, I will introduce you to the plastic industry and the issues associated with it. Because plastic is much more than just a waste management problem. The whole life cycle of plastic is polluting from A till Z. That's why I will interview Delphine from FairFin Plastic. She's the plastic expert and will tell us more about the life cycle of plastic and its risks for the environment, the climate and our health. So Delphine, please tell us who you are and what FairFin Plastic does.
So my name is Delphine Lévi Alvarès. I'm the European coordinator for the FairFin Plastic movement. And FairFin Plastic was born in 2016 out of the desire of a few organizations across the world to counter the industry narrative around plastic pollution, which was at the time and is still today that plastic pollution is mainly an ocean issue, that it's mismanaged waste that is responsible for that it's mostly developing countries, and especially Southeast Asia and a few rivers around the world that are generating this pollution. And so we came together to break the walls between the NGOs that were working on the different parts of the plastic value chain and build a holistic answer to this false narrative. Because since we had been working through different organizations for many years on the solutions and on exposing double standards, how the industry behaves in Europe, in the US, and very differently in other parts of the world, the idea was really to show that actually, no, it was not a litter issue, it was not an ocean issue, it was not because of people in the developing world that were in this situation, but that it was because of production of plastic, of how much companies are actually putting plastic on the market for their benefit and not taking care of what happens to this plastic at the end of life.
So it's more than a waste management issue, as you say?
So very often people don't think about where plastic comes from. They sort of think that the packaging was born on the shelves of the supermarket. Well, actually, it's coming from oil and gas, mainly, 99 point something. And what's very important is that plastic originally, the feedstock for plastic originally was sort of waste from the extraction process. So it's, when you extract oil and gas, you have other byproducts. And the idea was at the time when the oil and gas prices were very high, companies didn't really need to make any more profit. But then as this changed over time, they started also to think about how do we use the byproducts from this process and make the most of it. And plastic was one of the byproducts from extraction of oil and gas for energy, transport, and all of that for a long time. With all the evolutions that happened in the oil and gas sector when it comes to how much we use for energy, for heating, for transport, the demand for oil and gas has changed over time, and the prices have changed as well. and where plastic was a byproduct for certain companies, now it's becoming increasingly one of the most valuable production that they actually run. And that is a very, very big difference in like how plastic plays a role in the oil and gas demand, because it's not like a demand that sort of tags along the demand for energy and transport and building. It is actually its own curve in a way. And that's really a challenge. That's also really because we don't see plastic today enough as a supply-driven issue. Most people think that by reducing the demand, we reduce plastic production, we reduce plastic pollution. And we do have production of plastic, not because there is a demand, but we have it because it's a way for companies, oil and gas companies and petrochemicals companies, to keep making profit. So if we reduce the demand for plastic on packaging and other parts of our life, it doesn't mean that we're going to have less plastic overall. It means that the outlet for plastic will be a new market, a new type of plastic, a new type of product that we haven't even thought about, because there are behind this plastic pollution issue like real aggressive commercial strategies, and keep portraying plastic as an unavoidable material for the daily life.
And are you seeing classic big fossil fuel companies who are focused on energy, on transport, on things that we know are changing in a post-Paris Agreement world, things we know that will be more electrified or reduced? Are you seeing a shift from the classic use of fossil fuels to plastic as plan B?
Yeah, a massive shift. There are lots of numbers on where investments are going today and what comes after the extraction. And the petrochemicals company is the development of this industry is the main driver for the increase in the demand of oil and gas. And the main driver for the development of the petrochemicals company is plastic production.
What's the impact of plastics on the climate? If we want to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees, what's the role of plastics in this story?
Well, plastic today, as you explained before, is a big consumer of oil and gas. And this is one of the main drivers of climate change today. So to stay under 1.5, which is, I think, already unrealistic since we haven't done much since the Paris Agreement, we would need to dramatically reduce plastic consumption and obviously plastic production. What plastic also does to climate change, which is probably less direct as an impact, is that because, or thanks for some people, to packaging, we have really extended a lot of value chains, in particular the food supply chain. We are able to export stuff all over the world, fresh food or food, because of plastic. And that has an impact on how we produce. So it sort of fosters intensive agriculture and industrialized agriculture. That also fosters lots of ships and planes flying around the world carrying products. So this is also having a sort of an invisible impact on climate change. Another impact that happens more down the line is that when you have plastic waste, you have several pathways for this plastic waste. So one of the big pathways, especially in the global north, is incineration, with or without energy recovery. That is not even the question, because the climate doesn't really care about that. At the end of the day, when you burn plastic, you burn fossil fuel, and then you emit CO2. So incineration, emits a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. When plastic doesn't go to incineration but ends up, let's say, in a landfill, when it degrades, or in the environment, when it degrades, it's going to emit methane. And we know that methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. But also what happens with plastic ending up in the ocean and degrading into microplastic particles is, as far as science knows today, is two things. One of the things is really sort of harming the phytoplankton that is really responsible for keeping our ocean's capacity to be like a lung that's going to absorb CO2 and give back oxygen. So because planktons are basically eating plastic, they are less able to play this role. And so the oceans are a lot less a carbon sink than they were before.
So now I think we've sort of heard a story from plastics from A to Z, from extraction to the microplastics ending up in, well, everywhere, or our oceans, our soils, our air, our blood. And you've touched upon it earlier in our talk when you said that plastics gave us the opportunity to package our food in a way that we could export it further and longer and better. Are you saying no, that's not true? It's not as useful as people might think?
I think it's not a question of if it's useful or not. For me, it's a question, are we using it for the right thing? And having food being shipped all around the world and having countries sort of dedicating their soils to feed other people in the world than their own population because they make more money out of that, for me, is an issue. And I think we need to rethink our relationship to plastic. And that means also redefining our relationship to what's really important. Plastic has allowed us to consume a lot more than what we need. So useful in the system we have today, yes. But is this system what we need? No. So I think that's where the question needs to be addressed. But when we talk about alternatives to single-use plastic, we are not talking about alternative material to single-use plastic. We're talking about alternative system. You don't have any sustainable material, you have only sustainable systems. But what we're questioning by questioning the material is a system that this material sustains. And plastic is the symbol of the overconsumption and of a system that has been really booming after the Second World War, where people increasingly started to consume things that they didn't need.
It seems that plastic isn't just polluting and unsustainable, but is making it possible for us to live an unsustainable lifestyle. So when you're saying that we need a system change, then when our policymakers say that we should just recycle everything, let's hear your tirade on why recycling isn't the solution.
So this narrative that, it's okay if it's recyclable has been really, really dominant in the debate for a long time. I'm hearing more and more, even from decision makers, even surprisingly from industry, our sentence, our narrative of we won't recycle our way out of plastic pollution, which shows you how it has evolved, but it's not necessarily in the direction where you want it to evolve. Today, when we say we won't recycle our way out of plastic pollution, we mean it because of several elements. First, there's still a lot of chemicals in plastic products at the production stage that you don't want to recycle and have put back in your products. The toxic element is completely forgotten. Coming back to mechanical recycling, the way it's done today, about 9% of the of all the plastic that has ever been produced has been recycled. So it's very limited. And when it's recycled, it's usually downcycled, meaning that since you don't have this traceability that you need to really make a plastic bottle out of a plastic bottle or a food packaging out of a food packaging, you end up using what you collect from mostly food packaging, but also other kind of packaging. You end up using that for products that won't be recycled afterwards. So buckets, pipes, benches, fleece jackets or jumpers. And so they have maybe one more cycle of life, but then it's over. Because there is no recycling system pretty much for any other plastic in packaging. And I think that's something that people may not realize is that, recycling is also limited in itself because it will address just a fraction of what we produce. When I talk about we need a system change, I really say the global north needs a system change and put their act together, because not only we're blaming the ones who are suffering the most at the moment for the impact of our actions today, but we are the ones responsible for having created this climate change in the first place. They're not. They are not the ones who've been consuming the way we consume. They are not the ones who've been making money out of oil and gas and building empires out of, colonizing other countries to take their resources, in particular oil and gas.
So before we all get too depressed with the impact of plastics, maybe we should brighten up the mood and think about solutions on plastics. And we've already heard plenty of solutions, but it seems like a very, very straightforward, easy answer. Is it that simple, just to reduce all our plastics?
Well, the solution is indeed to reduce and rethink. So there are lots of things that we consume today that we don't need. Lots of packaging that we have today that is completely unnecessary. So it's starting with really reducing, removing where it's possible. And then for everything that somehow we need to be rethinking the way we get these products. When we question the packaging, then we're not questioning necessarily what's in the packaging. We're questioning how they get the product to us and through which means. So having reusable packaging, having products that are loose and you go with your own container, or there is a system with containers there. Either where the place I purchase it or the people who sell that have a system around this product for me to get it in a reusable container and then just give it back. Or I have solutions where it's not packaged and I go with my own containers if it's what you want to do. It also requires to change the way products are packaged and marketed, because a lot of the challenges we're having, for example, with beverage bottles, is because they're all different, because they need to attract your attention, and with the shape and the color, you need to recognize the brand. But if we were to have Europe-wide, or at least transboundary deposit return systems for reusable bottles, we would need to have standardized packaging. We would need to have enough mass and not the need to return that specific bottle to Coke and this specific bottle to Pepsi, but to be able to, okay, Pepsi has that many items on the market, Coke has that many items on the market, then there you go, this is your reusable bottle cleaned and you just have to put your product in it. If you have something in bulk, how do you stand out compared to your competitor? So that's one of the main issues. It's not because they can't do it. technically speaking. It's because if they do it, they lose a lot of the money that comes from marketing and what makes them stand out. So I think it's really about also understanding the weight of marketing in this conversation.
So we as a consumer are conditioned by the big companies to consume plastics, and it seems that the most plastics around us is not something that we necessarily need. As someone who is listening to this podcast, in his own he can't change the system, but what can an individual do?
By changing the way you consume, you're showing that something else is different, that the offer has to change, but it's not on the consumer to do the bulk of the work. I think like listeners of this podcast can also really change things by supporting organizations that are helping to change the system. Like we have our We Choose Reuse campaign, where we're trying to show with the simple signatures to decision makers and businesses that citizens are ready and willing to see the change happening, but that we are counting on them to make that happen. It's important that we place a responsibility where it actually lies. And I think for way too long, we've placed a responsibility on consumers for the pollution, but also then for the solution, while the whole time the responsibility has been with the ones who make profit out of the current system. But so by mobilizing with movements, with organizations, and sharing the knowledge about what they hear, I think this is how you create this system change.
And on this positive note, I think it's good to wrap up. I think we all learned a lot. And I want to thank you for joining us in this talk. Next episode, we'll be joined by Joan Mark of Zero Waste Europe to talk more about the idea of plastics and the way that we consume plastics in our daily lives. Thank you, Delphine.
Thank you.
Plastic and plastic production are bad for the environment, the climate, and our health. That's why FairFin demands banks to stop investing in companies that are planning new plastic projects. Through our website www.fairfin.be, Belgian citizens can send complaints to their banks. Help us put pressure on them and send a complaint to your bank. Are you curious to hear more? In the next episode of the FairFin Plastic Podcast, I will talk to Joan Mark Simon from Zero Waste Europe. Together we will take a look at the systemic risks of plastic, the mechanisms behind the plastic market, and how consumerism and plastic are related.
Nobody likes to use plastic, use stuff that becomes waste so quickly. So I think it's important to develop alternatives that make it as easy and not more expensive for people to do the right thing. And then I'm convinced that people will do it.